Anyway, I was sitting there at 3 a.m. The house was completely still. And suddenly I became aware of this tapping noise. And then I started to have a very strong feeling. I thought this was something coming from the spirit world.
I actually hit something solid. It just stopped me in my tracks. And that's the message I had gotten, is this evilness, I guess, was trying to infiltrate my life, my family.
My dad was very unusual. In many ways, he was very pragmatic, very practical man. But he used to say things that struck me as rather interesting and odd. He'd say, everything has an energy field. He'd tell us, we'd be standing around the kitchen table, he'd say, look at that table. It has an energy field. There's something there. And of course, we were little kids, and what did we know? We'd stand there and go, really? We'd try to see the energy field, we couldn't. But he'd say, no, everything. Wood holds memories. And he'd say, if you touch a piece of wood, it has a memory. It will absorb your essence, and your essence will remain with it. And if you're sensitive, you can pick these things up.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Chow. Today's ghostly encounters involve two women who would tell us about how their fathers continue to give them advice even from beyond the grave. When Barbara Allen was young, her father taught her about Morse code. To a little girl, this was just one more aspect of her dad's time as a soldier in World War II. But many years later, Barbara believes that her dad used a code of some kind to save her mother's life.
As a young man, he was in the Battle of Britain. He used to tell us about things that he'd learned in war, about codes, Morse codes, things like that. And he'd try to explain how codes worked and how codes were really important to keep in secrets from the enemy and that sort of thing. And he cared deeply about what was happening to the people in Britain. I have his wartime diary. His diary really showed how protective he was of everyone, including his family. And I think that sense of protection is something I always remember about him, and it came through later on in a very strange way. And the story that I'm about to tell really probably relates very much to the fact that he believed in energy, he believed in our spirits going on, continuing. He believed in the afterlife very much. He believed that love transcends time. And those things came back to me after my experience. I was, I guess, a young mother at the time. I just woke up, I had a touch of the flu. I went downstairs and sat down in the living room, and I felt really uncomfortable. I needed to be by myself. Anyway, I was sitting there at 3 a.m. The house was completely still. And suddenly I became aware of this tapping noise in the wall. First I thought, oh, it's the pipes, it's a late night noise, nothing to worry about. Well, the tapping in the wall became a bit louder. And gradually I found my attention being drawn to it. And then I started to count, just for fun, the taps. And I counted 1, 2, 3, and went on till 10. And then it stopped. And then I heard it again. So I counted again. 1, 2, 3. 10 taps. And it stopped. I thought, this is peculiar. Again and again. I stood up and I went to the wall where the tapping was coming from. I didn't know what was going on. I thought, well, I've never heard anything like this before, ever. And then I started to have a very strong feeling. I thought this was something coming from the spirit world. Now, my father had passed away 2 years earlier, and I started to feel his presence. I started to feel that the tapping was coming from my father. I became overwhelmed with that feeling, and it felt right. I had chills running up and down my body, and I ran upstairs to wake up my husband, Rick, who was sleeping, and tell him. That was my first reaction. He came downstairs. I said, "You've got to hear this. I think it's Dad. I think he's trying to tell me something." We went to the wall. Complete silence. It had totally vanished. There was no more sound of anything. I looked at him. I said, I swear that this was going on. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, maybe it was meant for you and you alone." So I thought, oh, that's what it is. It's a message from my father. But what is he trying to tell me? 10? I thought, okay. Morse code. It has to be Morse code. So I was left with this mystery. What does 10 mean? And I thought, this is really typical of Dad, to send out a number and then not make it really easy for me to figure out what he's talking about. Anyway, the answer didn't really become clear until 10 months later, when I got a call from my brother. My brother and my mother live about 6 hours away, just outside of Montreal. And he said, well, I just brought Mom to the hospital. I don't think it's anything serious, but I just thought you should know. The moment I heard those words, I thought, okay, something's going on here. I phoned my sister, who also lives in Toronto, and I told her that I thought we should be going to see my mother. She was in the hospital. I thought we should be there. I had a very strong feeling of urgency around it. I kept thinking of the tapping, and I kept thinking, there's a warning here. We must go in. This is not something benign or pleasant. This is something very serious. We all went to Montreal. So my mother was in the hospital, not with something minor, but with a massive heart attack. We were met by a doctor who said, "Your mother is seriously ill, and we're trying everything we can, but we don't think she's going to survive." We stood around her bedside, and you can imagine, if you've ever had a loved one in that kind of situation, how terrible and urgent it felt to us. We were around her bedside, looking at her, saying, "Mom, we love you. Please, if you need to go, we understand, but we're here. We love you. We'd like you to stay." And the doctor said, "You should go home now. It was late. You should go home, try to get some sleep. I don't think your mother's going to make it. It'll be a miracle if she survives." So you can imagine how we felt. We couldn't sleep. We ran to the hospital at 6 a.m. the next morning. My mother was alive. And the doctor met us and said, "This is a miracle. I've never seen anything like it, that your mother is alive after that massive heart attack. She managed to survive." And I looked at my sister, I looked at my brother, and we were exhausted. We were crying. And I felt, "Thank you, Dad. You did this." I knew he had communicated with me in such a way that I knew we needed to be there, and we were all there around her. And I think he was responsible for the miracle. I think even in the spirit state, he reached out and made a difference. What brought her miraculous recovery on was the fact that she was aware of her 3 children standing around her bedside, sending our love to her. Because even in her weakened state, she could feel how we loved her and how terribly important it was to us that she stay. And it made me feel like there is life after death. There is love which transcends time and boundaries. And he's with us, he's with our family. Whenever we need him to be, whenever we want to call on him, he's there for us. He's watching out for us. And I believe that with all my heart.
Barbara uses a language of care and protection to talk about her father. Our consultants note that it's a lot like the language used by Jews and Christians to describe the love and care of God. But Barbara never speaks of God by name. It's as if her belief in a guardian spirit is her personal alternative to religion. Elsie Bordniuk is part Inuit, and her views of spirituality were shaped by that culture.
When my father died in my arms in the year 2000, it was very traumatic for all of us. We loved him so much. But we also believe that he had come to us past his physical leaving of the body. That night when he had died, his spirit had actually come to me in my home. And I had seen a beautiful, bright ball of light just floating up by the wall and then just slowly, very slowly, dissipate into the room. And I knew he was saying, I'm here, I'm okay, and don't grieve, which is hard to do, you still grieve.
Elsie's father died in her arms, but she was sure his spirit remained. And so he continued to be a part of her life for many years.
It was his anniversary of his death, and exactly at 4:30 p.m., all of a sudden I was just overwhelmed, feeling very melancholy, and still asking the same question, did I make the right decision to follow my dreams as an artist? I still wasn't too sure if I had made the right decision. And I actually audibly asked this question like, Dad, what should I do? And I could hear a scratch, scratch, scratch behind the wall where I was sitting, and there's a huge bookcase right beside me, about 6 inches away from me. But as I stood up, and I scratching a little bit louder, and all of a sudden this little photo album just moved towards me very quickly. I was a little bit frightened. I wasn't sure, did I just see what I thought I saw? Because I was alone in the house at that time. And I thought, yes, I did see this thing move. And I kind of freaked out because I did ask my dad that question, didn't I? And I figured that was his sign of telling me, go for it. I'm going to support you 100% where I am. I think you should go for it. And I took that as a sign. I had phoned my mother up that night, and I told her what happened. And she said, no, that's probably your dad trying to communicate with you. Whatever you wanted to know, he gave you an answer. So I'm absolutely convinced that my father is still looking out for me. But that's not the only thing. I usually get hit pretty hard when there's a message coming. This house that we lived in here in Toronto has taught me a great deal about the spirit world, that they are trying to connect with me for some reason. Usually I know when there's a message coming. The cats would look at one particular corner of the house all the time and not go near it when there was some sort of activity in the house. And there's also times when I would be sitting in our kitchen and the porch you can see the porch from our kitchen. And from time to time, I would see this gray figure cross and go out the door, and you could audibly hear the door open and close. I knew there was a message coming. I had gotten up in the middle of the night to get a drink from the refrigerator. So the house is black, dark, no lights on. I actually hit something solid. It just stopped me in my tracks. But because of the feeling I got instantly when I hit that black wall, it was so evil, it was menacing, and it was, the message I got immediately is that there's a problem, not here in Toronto, it's a problem in Winnipeg. And the very next day I phoned my mother and I says, what's the matter? And she says, well, apparently the night before my son had gotten into trouble. He had been beaten up by thugs. He was beaten up quite severely. And that's the message I had gotten, is this evilness, I guess, was trying to infiltrate my life, my family, whatever. This is the message I got. So I pay close attention to whenever these phenomena happen around me. I'm more accepting. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things that my mom and dad used to tell me is unexplainable. So why try and find an explanation for it? Just accept it as it is and listen. Listen to the voices. If you can save a life just because you listen to something, it helps. My father always used to say that you couldn't separate the human, the spirit, and the earth. Where we came from, we're as one. So I'm paying attention now when something comes to me in the house. I had phoned my mother up that night and I said to her, how are you feeling? I just had this feeling I had to ask her. And she says, my leg has been hurting a lot lately. Like, it always hurts before, but right now it's really killing me. She says, Mom, do me a favor. I think you have to see a doctor, like, today, and call me back when you've come back from the doctor. She went that day on my insistence to see the doctor. And he told her if she hadn't come in that day, she would have been dead within 24 hours. There's a blood clot in her lower leg that it was starting to move. And if they hadn't taken her to the hospital that night, she would not be alive. So I'm absolutely convinced that was my dad talking to us. They always told me, listen to the voices, and I didn't realize until lately what they were telling me about listen to the voices, what it could mean, is there's always a guide with us or a guide with you. And they're always trying to communicate with you so that you follow the path that's better for you, for your development spiritually and mentally. So I try to listen to these voices now. I still get advice from my mother, though. When my father died in my arms in the year 2000, it was very traumatic for all of us. We loved him so much. His philosophy, and I followed it to this day, there's something supernatural in the earth that we can't see. It's not tangible. But if you look hard enough, you can see the residual of a spirit. He believes that we live beyond our human existence, that we're just a shell. And as soon as we leave our bodies, we still have missions to accomplish, and I believe that too. So I'm absolutely convinced that my father is still looking out for me.
Like Barbara, Elsie doesn't speak of God by name, but she does speak of a spiritual world. Our consultants remark that this is part of a movement in which God and nature are one. A movement that has spirit guides instead of priests, ministers, or rabbis. In many cultures, these are believed to be dead relatives. They're always available for guidance and protection, still very much a part of family life. Barbara and Elsie's views are more in line with these cultures than with traditional Western beliefs. They rely on more than just a living, for they feel they can also count on the spirit of their dead fathers.
I think our loved ones who pass on watch out for us and are there. And I think they love to be acknowledged, like today. I think their love goes on. And I think what we need to remember is that anytime we need their support, they're there for us. All we have to do is ask. All we have to do is be open to it. We're never alone. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that we're never alone, because so many of us go through life sometimes feeling alone, even when we're with people. But you've always got love there, protecting you and surrounding you.
My mom and I believe that even though we like to hang on to my dad as long as possible, even though he has passed away now for several years, is we also have to let him go and let him do what he has to accomplish. He comes and visits us from time to time, but we believe he still has things to do in his world. Whether we're physically here or spiritually here, you always have something to accomplish.